Okay, let's talk about some airspace. The National Airspace System. First type of airspace we're going to talk about is uncontrolled airspace. And what is uncontrolled airspace? Well, uncontrolled airspace is any airspace not under the jurisdiction of air traffic control, but still subject to federal aviation regulation. The dimensions of uncontrolled airspace are known as class Gulf. So Gulf dimensions.
Check that mix. I got mix.
What do you got in there? All from the surface.
Blueberry, ice, and the good shit. Peach, pineapple.
Up to the overlying or adjacent airspace. Adjacent controlled airspace. Or adjacent controlled airspace. Okay, so that's actually not too hard to understand. If it's uncontrolled airspace, or if it's not controlled airspace, it'd be uncontrolled airspace. Pretty easy. So what do we need to be able to fly in uncontrolled airspace? We need to be a student pilot. And we have certain weather minimums. Okay? So, those weather minimums are as follows. If we're at 10,000 feet, MSL, or above 10,000 feet MSL, we need 5 statute miles of visibility. We need to be 1,000 foot above, 1,000 foot below, and 1 statute mile from, at least 1 statute mile from any clouds. So that's our, what we need to be able to fly in class Gulf airspace, which is kind of like free-for-all, you know. All you gotta do is be subject to some of these simple weather minimums, and follow FAA regulation. So there's some other weather minimums because this thing is not just above 10,000 feet. If we are at 10,000 feet, or rather below 10,000 feet, below 10,000 MSL, but above 1,200 AGL. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about some of the other. I'll cover that in just a minute. Below 10,000 MSL, above 1,200 AGL, breaks down into 2 categories: day and night. So in the daytime, we need 1 statute mile visibility. We need to be 1,000 foot above, 500 below, or 2,000 horizontal. And at night, our visibility requirement goes up. We need 3 statute miles. 1, 5, 2. Same as the other. Okay? Now then, we have below 1,200 AGL. Okay? So below 1,200 AGL, we need 1 statute mile a day, clear clouds. Good for For nighttime, we need 3 statute miles visibility, 1, 5, and 2. Bam. So those are the weather minimums that we have. Now, in uncontrolled airspace, we don't receive services for any kind of advisories or traffic separation for IFR or VFR traffic. It's another key thing to keep in mind, so we don't get any help. So now we're going to break this off into controlled airspace. Controlled airspace will be the falls under 2 categories: the airspace that surrounds an airport, and other airspace classified as controlled airspace that's not around airports. Controlled airspace, we'll start off with Class Echo airspace. Class E. Class E is defined as the airspace overlying the 48 contiguous states out to 12 nautical miles offshore from 17,999 feet to 14,500 feet, unless otherwise depicted. And that is very key with this type of airspace. Because in reality, and I kind of don't like the definition that the FAA uses of this 17,999 feet to 14,500, because typically, in most of the United States, the floor of that Class E airspace is down to 1,200 feet AGL. These are MSL, of course. Down to 1,200 feet AGL. And so really, in the whole eastern United States, it can be considered depicted as otherwise. What they're talking about with this particular type of depiction is, when you go out in the Rockies, you got a blue line. It's called a vignette. You got a blue line on the solid side of the line. Let's talk about the line. The line's got some shading. On the fuzzy side of the line, we have 1,200 AGL floor of Class E airspace. Drops down to 100 AGL. On the other side, we've got a floor of 14,500 MSL. The reason it's kind of weird is because we've got more of this than we do of this here. These are usually just in small spaces. That's why the definition is a little weird, I think. Doesn't that make sense to you? Doesn't the definition kind of weird? Starts at 14,500 feet.
Unless otherwise depicted, which is mostly otherwise depicted.
Mostly otherwise depicted.
So, Mike, you would always define...
If you're on the East Coast, it probably seems a lot weirder than if you're on the West Coast.
Yeah.
How much elevation is it?
There's a lot more flying on the East Coast.
When you look at sectionals out west, you see very little of this 14,500 feet type shit. So, now, there are some other things that can change the floor of this Class E airspace. This one's called is this domestic en route on this side of the deal? Is that what that's called, Rob?
Yeah, you got me.
Jesus. What are you here for? All right. Let's keep moving here. So now let's give an example of an uncontrolled Class Golf airport. Normally, an airport with no tower. Okay? It will look like that on our sectional chart. However, if we take and we put a dashed magenta line around that airport, actually I've got colors. Let me use these colors. We look at our sectional, we got one of these airports here. We'll call this the magenta color. And we put a dashed magenta line around that airport. What we're doing is we're adding a what's that called? Surface? It's a surface transition? Surface?
This is called surface. Echo surface.
So it's called a surface, and what we're doing is we're lowering the surface of lowering the floor of the Class Echo airspace to the surface. So it would look something like this. Flying along at 1,200 feet.
Is there anything like that in Florida?
There is.
I buzzed over their runway too.
I think there's two in Florida, isn't there?
I know of one.
Which one? The
Dade Collier, yeah.
The Dade Collier.
I've been there before.
The Dade Collier is one.
Landed or just low?
Landed. There's a bunch of overflights too.
It's a long runway. 13,000 feet.
So, if we were flying along over here, towards this airspace, we'd be at 1,200 AGL. As soon as we crossed into that dashed magenta line, we would have Class E separation services provided all the way to the floor. That is the other thing about controlled airspace, is in controlled airspace we can receive, IFR traffic is separated in controlled airspace, and we can receive, under VFR, workload permitting, some assistance from air traffic control also, with traffic advisories, alerts, and whatnot, if we ask for it. So that's what's called a surface. So we've lowered the Class E Echo airspace to the surface. Now let's take a look at another kind. We've got our nice little uncontrolled airport out here, like Okeechobee, and we've got a ring around it, which is a solid magenta line on one side, and then it's fuzzy on the inside. Okay. This is called a transition. Okay, so that's a transition. So what the transition does is it lowers the floor of the Class Echo to 700 feet. We're out here on the east coast of Florida. It's already lowered from 14,500 to 1,200 AGL because of we're on the fuzzy side of the blue vignette. So we start off at 1,200. We would approach this airspace. Once we get inside that ring, we go from 1,200 AGL to 700 AGL. That's the lowering of the Class Echo airspace. So why do we want to have lower Class Echo airspace? Well, the cloud clearance requirements are in place. We basically want to protect aircraft that are maybe on instrument approaches, that are climbing out or coming in. This is the main reason that for that Class Echo airspace, dropping it down like that. Okay, so that's...
Who does it keep on the ground?
Huh?
Who does it keep on the ground?
Keeps these guys that don't have radio communications or VFR pilots out of the way.
All VFR pilots who would be able to fly in the pattern, just below pattern altitude, clear clouds, and 1 statute mile keeps them out of there, so we're not going to bump into them on instrument approach.
When we're definitely in IMC conditions or tough times.
And when you think about it, if this was uncontrolled and we had this vignette, we could have pilots and there would be instructors out there flying around at 950 feet on the pattern, practicing with their students. Meanwhile, you got people coming in on instrument approaches. So without that vignette, it'd be perfectly legal because Echo starts at 1,200, so they could be clear clouds 1 mile during the day. We could bump right into them on approach, so they lower this to keep us out.
Okay, we'll talk about something else that we see that lowers the floor of the Class Echo airspace. We see this either offshore or in other locations out west where they want to define a specific MSL altitude for the floor of the Class Echo airspace other than the standard 1,200, 700, or 14,500. And what they do is they put it inside this line called a zipper line. The line that looks like this here. So We'll see this off the coast of the United States. We'll also see this out west. And it would say something inside between the two lines, something like 2700 MSL. So that's another way that we lower the floor of the Class Echo airspace. Now moving on, we'll cover one of the other ways that the Class Echo airspace is lowered when we cover a different airspace class. So let's talk about other controlled airspace. So when we make the transition to and from airports, we definitely need to know about the airspaces that are surrounding them. So let's talk about. Oh, I forgot to cover the cloud. The cloud clearances for this Class Echo airspace. Well, for Class Echo airspace above 10,000, we're going to need 5 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 foot above, 1,000 foot below, and 1 statute mile horizontal. Okay? So in Class Echo airspace below 10,000, we need 3 statute miles of visibility. We have to be 1,000 foot above the clouds, 500 foot below the clouds, and 2,000 foot horizontal. Okay, so those are the cloud requirements. Also, we need to be at least a student pilot. Okay.
Now, why does it change like that?
What does it change above and below 10,000 feet?
Why does it change visibility and cloud clearance?
Fast movers.
Yeah, because the aircraft can travel at higher speeds above 10,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Good one. So then, also, we're not required to maintain any kind of two-way communications, even though the airspace is controlled by an air traffic control facility. Being in that airspace, we just have to be at least a student pilot and maintain our cloud clearance requirements. So, yeah, we're going to talk about Class Delta airspace. Like the airspace here at wonderful Fort Pecker. So, we've got for control airspace, Class D airspace. We have an airport. Okay, that would be depicted on our sectional chart, a Class D airport with a tower. We'll see blue airport on our sectional chart. And we're going to see a dashed blue line around that airport. Okay? The dimensions of that airport from center, or dimensions of that, the radius is a 4 nautical mile radius. Okay? So that's typically what we have as far as the radius. Inside that blue box, there will be a set of pretty much like parentheses. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The dimensions, I like using this drawing actually a little bit better. It's got a 4 nautical mile radius.
I'll get there.
4 nautical mile radius.
Stay 1 mile for that.
And it's usually up to 2,500 foot above ground level. So now let me come back here the way it's depicted. An airport at sea level with a standard 2,500 foot above ground level size, dimensions, would provide an MSL altitude inside the box of 25 expressed in hundreds, so that'd be 2,500 feet.
Is that always the case?
Well, if the aircraft was since the dimensions of the airspace are typically 2,500 feet from the surface of the runway environment, what's charted in the box there would be an actual MSL altitude. So if we were, say, in...
Could it be lower than 2,500?
Yes, it can.
In Melbourne, it's like 19, isn't it?
Yeah, there's some places where
15.
it's typically 2,500 foot AGL, but in some places it's lower than that. And it might have to do with some of the other surrounding control airspaces and whatnot. Typically, though, it's going to be 2,500 foot AGL, so they put the MSL in the box. So to avoid the airspace, you need to be flying above whatever it says in the box, in hundreds, because that's an MSL altitude at the top of the airspace. So it's at 35. Okay, that's what we need to be flying at least 36 to stay away from. So, a couple things with the Class D airspace. We need to be at least a student pilot. Two is we need to maintain and establish two-way radio communication. Two-way radio. And number three, we need to follow certain cloud clearances. So cloud clearances for that, pretty simple. We need 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 foot above, 500 below, and 2,000 horizontal. Okay? So now let's talk about a scenario at a Class D airspace where we'd like to be able to get into the airport, but the field has gone IFR. So if we're in a situation where we have less than 3 statute miles visibility and 1,000 foot ceilings, normally we wouldn't be able to get into that airport, but we could call the tower and we could ask them for special VFR. Special VFR. And what special VFR does during the day, it allows us to come in when we have at least 1 statute mile of visibility if we can stay clear of the clouds. Now, will air traffic control let us do that at night? Only if you still have 1 statute mile of visibility and we have an instrument rating and the aircraft is equipped for instrument in accordance with 91-205. That's how we get a special VFR at night. So, all right, let's talk about.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Under what condition would you legally be able to ask for a special at night?
One statute mile of visibility, your instrument current.
What's Gulf Airspace requirements at night for VFR?
Night VFR?
352.
Oh, does it go up to 3? Son of a bitch. All right.
So it would have to be a ceiling only, not a visibility during the day. It could be ceiling or visibility, because technically it's 1 clear clouds.
And also, so at night it's 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so if we're operating in Gulf at night with 2 miles visibility, that's a prima facie case for violation of 91-155. And careless or reckless operation, 91-13. And probably 91-103 pre-flight actions.
Now this is a visibility that's this is a reported visibility. In the absence of a reported visibility, the visibility as determined by the pilot in the air also can take over for that. Just so you guys know. Now, let's talk about this Class Delta airport, and let's talk about the airspace surrounding this Class Delta airport. We have already established this Class Delta airport, 2,500 foot AGL. So let's kick it out this way a little bit and take a look at this outside lying airspace.
Oh, I'm wondering how would you ever get a night special VFR then? Because if you already have to be flying in 3152.
It's a ceiling alone, a ceiling type issue.
Well, because you might be outside the airspace.
Mm-hmm. You would be outside the airspace, so you have to get in there.
You got to get in there. They'll tell you steer clear of Class Bravo airspace because they're under conditions.
So if they got 1,000 foot ceilings with 3 mile visibility,
you're
still legally fine, but the field's going to be IFR.
Mm-hmm. And so you'd have to request a special. Now remember, at night you're supposed to be IFR current with the IFR airplane. There's a reason for that. They want you to be on IFR flight plan. So they say, okay, if you want to do something stupid, then this is what you have to be. So that you can say, well, I can do something stupid or I can do something smart. Option A or option B. They're most likely just going to file an instrument flight plan and stay safe on an approach instead of trying to dodge around weather to get to the airport.
So let's apply some of what we've already learned. Let's correlate a little bit some of the things we've already learned about Class Echo airspace. I can take this Class Delta airspace and I can do a couple of things to it. I could put the magenta vignette around there. That's the fuzzy side of that. And what that does is it allows me to step down in close to the air, inside of the ring, inside of the airspace. So I would go from that 1,200 down to 700. Now, another thing that I can do, and this is something with the Class Echo airspace that we didn't talk about just yet, but we could also put what's called an extension on there. An extension would look like this. And what that does is that lowers the Class Echo airspace all the way to the floor. Does it look like, does this cut off where this comes to usually?
I think it goes all the way to the blue ring, doesn't it?
It goes all the way to the blue ring.
It goes all the way to the blue ring.
Alright, cool. So let me depict that real quick for us.
Are you talking about the red vignette? Because that does get cut off.
That's the red ring.
Yeah, that gets cut off.
Yeah.
That gets cut off for the extension?
Correct.
I want to make sure I'm drawing this out correctly.
That is the correct way right there.
Alright, so in this case, eliminate any confusion here. What we would have is we would have our Echo airspace and then all the way to the ground. With that. So that's Class D airspace and all the Class Echo airspaces we need to cover combined in there. Now let's move along to Class Bravo, or Class Charlie airspace class. Class Charlie airspace is a delightful area to fly.
Let's go fly the Titusville today.
Have they got TFR up for that air show yet?
Is there a show?
There's one this weekend. Okay, let's talk about Class Charlie airspace, guys. Class
Kind of
Charlie airspace.
With all the gayness.
Let's take a look at Class Charlie airspace. Well, Class Charlie airspace typically has an inner airspace that goes from the surface to an altitude 4,000 foot above the runway, or runway environment. So 4,000 EGL. Take a look at that. It looks something like that. There's our to 4,000 feet. AGL. Bam. So it would look a lot like the Class Delta. However, we have another band of the airspace that extends out a little bit further because this is a 5 nautical mile radius from the center. Ooh. Okay. That inner ring of airspace up to 4,000 AGL. Now we have a top layer up here. Actually draw that a little bit lower.
Okay, all this here stuff is over here. Right?
Then we have another layer of this airspace. So where the airspace extends out with a 10 nautical mile radius from the airport center. 10 nautical mile radius. And that typically is from 1,200 foot AGL to 4,000 foot AGL. So we'll take a look at where that begins. 1,000 AGL, 4,000 AGL. So that's typically the extra ring of airspace and part of this Class Charlie. So now, let's take a look at how this would be depicted on our sectional chart. For this Class Charlie, we've got one ring, that inner 5 nautical mile radius ring, and then another magenta line for this top layer of airspace right here. And the way these are drawn out is an airport at sea level. I'm just going to use a sea level example because these are charted in MSL. So inside the inner ring, we go from surface to 4,000 feet MSL. Okay? And out here, we go from 1,200 feet to 4,000 MSL. If a Class Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong here, if a Class Charlie airspace underlies a Class Bravo airspace and it goes up to the next Bravo, when the Bravo takes over, it'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That means that it goes up to the floor of the Class Bravo airspace. The overlying Class Bravo airspace. Again, that's MSL. Now the typical, like I said, the typical airspace is actually 4,000 AGL. It goes up to 4,000 AGL. However, the way it's charted over here is an MSL. That just makes it easier for us so we don't have to make any kind of crazy calculations while we're flying. If we just stay above that number right there, 4,000, we fly right over it. So here's what we need in order to be able to conduct operations in Class Charlie airlift. We need to be at least a student pilot. We got to be a student pilot. Okay, number one. Number two, establish and maintain two-way radio communications. You brought up a real good point yesterday. Say we call up this Class Charlie airspace, and we say Class Charlie or Daytona. We use Daytona.
Approach.
We use Daytona approach. This is Cessna 88 Echo Papa. If they tell us Cessna 88 Echo Papa, go ahead. At that point, we've established two-way radio communications. However, if we call them up and we say Daytona approach is Cessna 88 Echo Papa, and they tell us aircraft calling, stand by. Okay, they don't specifically identify and spire a tail number. At that point, established two-way radio communications are not established, so we'd have to remain clear of the airspace. So that's a good point to bring up. Number three, for operations inside the Class Charlie airspace, we need a Mode C transponder. Okay. We need a Mode C transponder to be able to operate in the Class Charlie. Also, if we're going to overfly the Class Charlie airspace, we need a Mode C transponder as well to overfly Class Charlie airspace.
Why is that?
Because it helps them.
It verifies we're outside of their airspace.
It gives verification we're outside of their airspace. They're not freaking out. So, Mode C transponder, and it's also to overfly. So I'll put that in parentheses. Also to overfly.
But you don't need it under the ring, right?
You don't need it under the ring. You don't need it under the ring. It brings me to another thing I want to talk about with this Class Charlie airspace. Well, let's say we've got a uncontrolled airfield out here, and we want to depart from that uncontrolled airfield. That's under the ring of Class Charlie airspace. Okay? We need to do one of two things. We can either stay under that ring, stay under that 1,200 foot AGL, and not enter the Class Charlie airspace. However, if we do have intentions of piercing that airspace to go to our destination, how soon do we need to make contact with the controlling agency for that airspace, for that Class Charlie, for that tower?
As soon as practical.
As soon as practical, but before we cross into the airspace. Can't just cross into their airspace. When we take off, we've got to stay below that until we get a hold of them.
Wouldn't it be possible? Yeah. I think what they're talking about with that is when an airport lies within the surface area of a Class Charlie. I've never actually ever seen it, but apparently somewhere in this country.
What they're talking about?
Yeah. They're talking about an uncontrolled airport within the airspace. I think I've seen maybe one, I can't remember what it was, but I don't think it was Charlie, I think it was Delta, where there's a primary airport in the service area, and just within inside of that, there happens to be another airport. Wacky, I've never actually seen an example of this in Bravo or Charlie, so I wouldn't know where the hell they're talking about.
All right.
But if it's within the service area of that Charlie airspace,
Gotcha.
That's what they want us to do.
So at that point, we would take off and we'd have to contact them as soon as we possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't we have to try and contact them before we even took off to get a clearance?
No, because the airspace surrounds the primary airport, and that airport is what's controlled. The secondary airport wouldn't have a control tower. And while it's within the Charlie airspace, it's not.
You don't think you'd be able to reach them?
You would be able to reach them, but remember, you got to make up your traffic calls to other people using that airport. Weird.
My question is, what if that little airport that's under the shelf, not inside the primary airport's area, does have a control tower? Who do you contact?
Contact the control tower for the control tower.
Of that airport?
Of that airport.
But what if you're coming into land? Because you're supposed to contact...
It would still be that particular...
Some of this weather real quick. Pretty simple. Same as the Delta. 3 statute miles of visibility. And 1,000 foot above. 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. Easy. That's our lovely Class Charlie airspace. Now let's talk about the Class Bravo airspace. Class Bravo airspace, friends, is nothing to be scared of. It's actually a delightful place to be.
Your IFR.
That's not even bad VFR, man. I took from Class Bravo's VFR all the time.
Been there once.
Really? When I was time billing, dude, when we flew VFR like almost every flight. I don't care where we go. VFR flights. Now we got our Class Bravo airspace. Class Bravo airspace, it kind of resembles an upside down wedding cake. It starts out with a core airspace directly surrounding the airport, and then it branches out at whatever various altitudes they choose, because this type of airspace is specifically tailored to the area that it's in. surrounding major airports in the United States. As far as the dimensions of this Class Bravo airspace go, it's going to vary with every single one. Important thing to keep in mind. However, it typically goes no higher than 10,000 foot Typically goes no higher than 10,000 foot MSL. Double check me. Pretty sure I'm right.
Should be
though.
a but. You can find examples such as Atlanta Hartsfield that goes up to 12, I believe, and Miami, which only goes to 7.
7. You can find some examples. Typically, though,
Typically,
we're looking at 10,000 MSL for a Class Bravo airspace. Okay? As far as that, dimensions, this thing's going to be, you might get a nice symmetrical one, like somewhere like, hell, I don't even know where the nice symmetrical one's at. They're all cut up.
Mm-hmm.
They're cut up, for various reasons. They might, have a corridor or a flyway for VFR traffic cross through. So they might kind of have a little cut there. They want to kind of keep them clear of the area or whatnot because they have a lot of separation services to provide for all the IFR traffic that's coming in there.
Denver's 12 also as well. I was wondering like a high altitude airport because if it's Denver's 5,000 feet and 12,000 MSL is your surface, that means you really only have 7,000 AGL.
So what do we need? What do we need in order to operate in Class Bravo airspace? Well, number one, we need to be at least a private pilot. Changes from what we've been discussing so far. However, a little asterisk that we can put kind of beside this one. A student pilot with proper endorsements can operate in some Class Bravo airspace. There's a list. I'm pretty sure it's in the FARs. Is it in the FARs or in the AIM? It's in the AIM. There's a list in the AIM that talks about some airports where a student pilot will not be able to operate. However, in a lot of our Class Bravos, as long as the student pilot has proper endorsement, which will include ground and flight training by an authorized instructor, they would be able to operate under specific requirements in the Class Bravo airspace. Number two, to be in the Class Bravo airspace, we need to be cleared to enter your radio comms. Okay. So rather than just establishing two-way communications like we do the Charlies, the Deltas, and whatnot, entering Class Bravo airspace, we need to hear our aircraft call sign followed by phrase cleared to enter in Class Bravo. Okay? They don't always specifically say it like that, but we definitely need to hear the word cleared in whatever phrase that they use to get us into the Class Bravo. Crucial. Number three is we need a Mode C transponder. Now, can we transit? Is there any way we can skip that Mode C transponder, transit to the Class Bravo? Okay, there's pretty much always an exception to the rule. We would need to contact the controlling agency for that Class Bravo airspace. And
how long before we get there should we contact them?
24 hours. Is it 24 hours?
It's either 24 or 1.
I thought it was 1 hour. It's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
Check.
Double check.
91,
Double check that.
129-ish. 91, 129.
So flying Grandpa's Piper Cub, he doesn't have a transponder. What about radio communications? There's no way to do it without radio communications.
That you have to have.
You got to have radio comms. So it's just, you can operate without a transponder if you have a prior arrangement with that controlling agency and you notify them 1 hour prior entering the airspace, or attempting to enter the airspace. Now, that brings me back to something else. The way this is depicted is this is a solid blue line. This is a solid blue line, or a series of solid blue lines. This is the way it's depicted on the chart. Now let's take a look at, grab my magenta marker, and take a look at another way that this airspace could be. So let's say this airspace was nice and symmetrical, which it isn't always the case. The airspace would look like this. And it would be depicted in much the same way that the Charlie would be. It would have, like, for example, surface to 10,000 feet.
Must have a transponder.
And the next ring out might say 12 to 10,000. And the next ring out might say 4 to 10,000. And those are in MSL. So we need to be at, depending on where we're at, we need to be at, if we wanted to avoid the airspace altogether and fly over it, we need to be above 10,000 MSL, or if we chose to fly under specific rings, depending on where we're at, we need to be under these altitudes. These altitudes are in hundreds. There's also something that goes around. We'll come back to the transponder. There's a magenta line that extends 30 nautical miles out from the center, and that is called the Mode C veil. So, even if we're not in the Class Bravo airspace at that point, we need to have a Mode C transponder on our aircraft to operate anywhere inside any of the airspaces.
It is 1 hour.
That are inside, okay.
AT deviations.
Cool.
Now, we also found a problem with the regulation because this says subject to the restrictions of 91.215A and 91.215E. 91.215E does not exist.
I just discovered that, brother.
No, it goes to D.
Damn, let's call them up, man.
Yeah, like, what's up?
Let's flip the system and be like, hey, I'm going to get you in on some information. But you're going to just give me an instructor rating. Okay, we're not even going to do the check right. There. Alright, so you guys got the Mode C veil here? Got that pretty simple?
As Mode
How
C
high does the
veil.
Mode C veil go?
Well, Mode C veil goes up to infinity.
Goes
Really
up
only
to
needs to go to
10,000 feet.
10,000 feet, because you got to have, above 10,000 feet, you got to have an operational Mode C transponder anyways.
How many codes is that transponder going to have?
Alright, and one thing we didn't cover,
49.
one thing we didn't cover inside, was airspeeds inside some of these airspaces. So if we go back, if we're in Delta or Charlie airspaces, the max airspeed that we can be at is 200 knots. Inside the Bravo, however, we can be as high as 250 knots. Now, if we take a look at Echo airspace, if we're under 10,000 feet, the max that we can be at is 200 knots as well. And if we're above 10,000 feet, then we can kick in the afterburners and be like Top Gun. So, they're keeping a good watchful eye on us in the Class Bravo airspace, so our requirements for cloud clearances are not quite as stiff. We've got 3 statute miles of visibility, and at that point we just have to remain clear of the clouds.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I can't find it on here. How is the altitude denoted, like in one of the shelves, when you have a number, then over the other number, which is your top and bottom for that shelf for Bravo? There's like the bottom number will be letters. It's something like the floor, or the ceiling of the underlying airspace. How's that written?
You cover that as a T.
T. You got to go through that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was busy looking at this.
Okay.
My bad.
That's all right.
You can find it over in Orlando Executive.
That's what I was trying to find. Yeah, I was looking for it probably while he was talking about it. So.
Now,
Let's see, okay.
let's talk about Class Alpha Airspace.
If you have a negative next to
Class Alpha Airspace will also remind me about something about Class Echo Airspace I forgot. So our Class Alpha Airspace is from flight level 180 up to, but not including, flight level 600. Now, I forgot to mention earlier that above flight level 600, we are back in Class Echo airspace, just so you know. So that's our Class Alpha airspace. We need to be on an instrument flight plan, which is beyond the scope of what we are talking about today. Instrument flight plan. Bam. That's our Class Alpha airspace, which extends the 48 contiguous states up to 12 nautical miles offshore.
So what's the cloud clearance for that?
Fly right in them.
What would be the cloud clearance for a glider in Alpha?
It's kind of weird, huh? They have instrument rating for gliders. You can be an instrument in a glider.
Would you have to be instrument in a glider to go above flight level 180?
That's the matter of some debate between some 4-bar people like Pierre and others. I maintain that there is no VFR in Class Alpha, with very few exceptions.
Well, Pierre's been on flight level 240 in a glider.
Though I have heard of gliders getting pushed up there.
Yeah,
Special use airspace.
24,000 less he's been in a glider in Europe somewhere. That's high.
Special use airspace. Alright. I just took a trip to Scotland, okay? And when I was in some Scotland, it's very large shrimp. They called them McPrawns.
What?
And
Big
these
prawn.
are your special use airspaces.
What's that?
These are your special use airspaces.
These are special use airspaces.
Is that a true story or you just making that up?
I made it up. I mean,
I believe you there for a
I
minute.
didn't make up the acronym. But you know, a large shrimp's called a prawn, right?
Yeah.
So McPrawn.
I guess
I thought
slightly
that was
uneducated
funny. I
world
had a real good
geography.
time with that.
I like
McPrawn.
that. That was good.
So I'm going to specifically spell these out here.
It would have worked better if you would have went to McDonald's in Scotland and ordered the shrimp.
Control firing area. A prohibited area. A restricted area. An alert area. And the last one is a national security area.
Extend that a couple more days. I can tell you really like what you're doing. We're going to extend this.
The first special use airspace we're going to talk about today is the MOA. It's denoted on both IFR and VFR sectional charts. And VFR sectional charts, it's the red airspace. Same thing with the IFR route charts. Now, the purpose of an MOA is to separate IFR traffic from the military guys. It's kind of their own little sandbox they like to play in and practice in. So what does that mean for us? Under IFR, if air traffic control can't provide separation, can't guarantee separation, they will not give us a clearance to fly through that airspace. We'll be rerouted. We'll get an amended clearance. For VFR, we can operate in this airspace all day long. There are no requirements for us to actually get permission to go in that airspace. That being said, if we do go into this airspace, we want to make sure we try and minimize our impact because we have people practicing in here. You know, national security, they're getting ready to go fight our wars and drop bombs on the Middle East and such. We want to allow them to be able to practice. So if the MOA goes from 500 up to 5,000, we don't want to have to deviate all the way around it because it's a fairly large MOA. A good idea is A, turn on all your lights, and B, fly as high as possible if you don't want to fly over it or you can't fly over it due to some other airspace, to stay on the outer edges of this MOA. It's always a good idea to contact ATC to find out if it's hot first. We don't need to, but it's always a good idea. We want to know, are there jets in there we need to worry about? We want to be as courteous as we can to our military aviators. If we're running right through the middle of this, they're going to have to do what's called knock off. They're going to have to stop practice, and meanwhile they're still burning all that fuel that our tax dollars are going to. So we want to be as nice as we can if we can't go around such an airspace. Any questions on that?
No.
Separates IFR traffic. We can operate a VFR without a clearance, but we will want to make sure it's hot, and we want to make sure that we keep ourselves visible. Now, an important thing to note is some of these military operations areas conduct operations called lights out. What does that mean for us? It means there's jets, high-speed jets changing rapidly altitude and heading with no lights on. They got their NVGs on. So they're practicing lights out operation as if they're going to war. So if we operate at night in an MOA that is conducting such an operation, we're not going to see the jets until they blow right by us and we can see afterburners or exhaust. So we have to keep that in mind. If you get a good proper briefing from DUAT or DUACs, they can tell you which ones are conducting lights out operations or not.
And that's by NOTAM and or by
NOTAM.
or it's also listed on the sectional chart.
Okay.
Specific times when they can expect it to be hot.
Correct. I don't believe they denote lights out operation.
But not lights out.
Okay.
I'm just saying
Yes.
the hotness level of the MOA.
Correct. So you can find all that information on the special use airspace panel of your chart for both VFR and IFR. Next, we have our controlled firing area. I still, to this day, do not understand why the FAA makes us know about this, because guess what?
We don't know about it.
It does not affect us whatsoever. A controlled firing area would be, I guess Fort Knox, they do a lot of tank training up there. There's a controlled firing area up there in there. And when they have a spotter looking for traffic, when traffic looks like they're coming in the area, they stop firing. So this airspace really doesn't affect us, but the FAA says we need to know about it. Now, these areas right here are not actually charted on any chart, but they are. Information is given to us within the AFD, right smack dab in the middle, and I will show you where one is. Here we go. We got night vision lights out operations, North Carolina and South Carolina right here. We got a controlled firing area in Milan, Tennessee. It's all backwards. So,
well, it shows up the right way.
Under the special notices section of AFD, we can find out where these controlled firing areas are. Not that it matters, because guess what? We still don't exactly know where it is when it's not charted.
Would that typically be found within the area of an MOA or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. An MOA denotes something set aside typically for aerial operations like bombing missions, dogfighting, so on and so forth. Next, we have prohibited areas, denoted by P. One of the prohibited areas, the only prohibited area I'm aware of in Florida, is P50. This is up by Jacksonville, and it basically protects the subbase up there. It goes up to, but not including 3,000. We can find this information on the special use airspace panel of the chart. It tells us, how high it goes and where it's located. And this is denoted by a blue line right here. And it's prohibited, which means operations inside this airspace are prohibited. You can get no permission to go in there, unless, of course, you happen to be with the Navy, and perhaps maybe they'll let you in because you're Navy in a Navy jet. So we cannot go there. An offshoot to prohibited airspace, and typically The next airspace we're going to talk about surrounds some prohibited airspace, or, it's a standalone airspace, is restricted airspace. Restricted airspace means that the airspace is, as it sounds, restricted. There are restrictions to us if we want to go in there. We can be cleared into this airspace if it's hot, provided that the controlling agency gives us such a clearance. Although typically, they won't give us such a clearance because the restricted airspace is like an MOA. Jets are practicing in there. So they can't keep us out of military operations area, but they can keep us out of the restricted area. Typically, when we ask whether the restricted area is hot or cold, that gives us a good idea of whether we can go in there or not. If there's jets in there, they're probably not going to give us permission to fly in there, but it's a possibility that we could. It depends on what's going on in there. Next, we have the alert area. The alert area can be found in southern Florida. There's 2 or 3 alert areas over there. And the alert area is something special. All it is a designated practice point for training operations. So if we were to look at the alert areas over by southern Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International, and Miami, they'll say concentrated volume of flight training activities. This is an alert area telling you, hey, you better watch out because there's a bunch of instructors and students working on airwork out there, and they're probably not looking out for you. I know because I'm an instructor. So this is warning you, hey, stay away from this area if at all possible. Otherwise, it's like trying to fly into a flock of birds. Ask Sully Sullenberg how that worked out for him. We don't want to do that. Next, we get a warning area. These are typically found more than 3 miles offshore, and this is for all the Navy guys, that are out there practicing their particular operations. Maybe they're out there firing their Sea Whiz cannons, or they're firing their mock rockets. It's things like that. It's a hazard to non-participating aircraft. So, warning areas surround the entire coast of Florida, pretty much, if you're looking at a sectional chart. And all they're really designed to do is warn us that, hey, man, the Navy might be out there shooting their missiles. So, you gotta watch out.
That's shooting a missile?
Yeah, shooting a missile. You never know what they're doing out there. And finally, national security areas. Hey, guess what? These are our ADIS complexes and our Part 93 special use airspace. So, when we go up to Washington, D.C., we have a national security area right there.
Also includes the ADIS?
I believe so, yeah. And these areas are just simply airspace where we have to meet certain requirements and are subject to certain restrictions as far as pilot certification to operate in this airspace. If we wanted to go up to the big 3, the DCA, Baltimore National, I forget the other 2. But
you're going to receive special training for that.
Correct. And not only that, you have to get a clearance. You've got to get cleared and get a special code. So it's not like you can just go in there on an IFR flight plan. You have to get a background check and cleared, and then they give you a special code when you file a flight plan to some airport within this airspace. You can do it, but there's a lot of screening process.
Now, if we're going to cross the ADIS,
we're going to cross the ADIS.
Number 1, we can't be a student pilot.
Correct.
Number 2, we either need to be on an IFR flight plan or a defense VFR flight plan.
And be talking and squawking.
I forget what was the corridor again.
What's the procedure for getting a defense VFR flight plan?
You simply file it.
You just file it.
Yeah, VFR. The corridor for what?
There's a corridor that you have to cross. The ADIS where you said you're going to cross. Yeah. There's also a time frame. I forget what that is.
It's
different for ocean versus
land. 3 minutes and 5 minutes. Don't ask me which. It's been a while since I've taken
It's like 10 nautical miles over land and 20 nautical miles over the ocean.
You're right.
That's probably the aim.
I bet it is. In fact, I know it is. I think Cesar was asked, what does he need to do to cross, and he couldn't find it in the FARs. And I said, just because it's in the FAR, you're not in the FAR, doesn't mean there's not.
Number 2 soon.
Where's the T on McPrawn?
That's not there. That's just another one that's listed with PTS there.
All right.
TFRs.
In relation to the National Airspace System. National Airspace System is a good one.
I hope I get asked on that one, because that one's pretty easy to talk on.
Yeah, you can chew up some time on that one, too.
TFRs stands for Temporary Flight Restrictions.
Say that called Papa.
Now, a temporary flight restriction is just what it sounds like. It's a restriction of flight that's temporary in nature. It could be brought about by many different things. Authority for the issuance of TFRs are found in Part 91. If you've ever read that far, it's right over there. We can get VIP TFRs. We can get national disaster TFRs. We can also get space operation TFRs. All regulatory guidance is provided in the middle of 91, around the 200 series, 217-ish. Let's double check that. No, not 217. It's earlier than that. Sorry. There we go. Space operations, barometric pressure settings, presidential, and national disaster areas. Also in the state of Hawaii, the actual governor of Hawaii can ask the FAA issue a TFR for volcanic activity. So there's multiple reasons why a TFR could be triggered.
Maybe a SIGMET too.
And the idea behind it is to keep other aircraft out of that area for a special reason. For instance, 3 years ago there was a crash of two old guys. You know, they kind of got in a mid-air collision and they fell down, and they issued a temporary TFR to keep everyone who wanted to go check out all the dead bodies hanging out, keep them away from the area. Really easy example of a TFR for our students is Walt Disney World. It has a temporary permanent TFR. And when we read the actual context of the TFR, we find out that it doesn't wholly exclude everybody. It only excludes people who are not talking and squawking over a specific area up to but not including 3,000. However, if we are receiving flight following or on our flight plan, we can run right through that TFR. So says the TFR itself. So when we check TFRs, we want to check for certain things. Aircraft operations, which are restricted, the location and altitude of the TFR, and when is it good for. You know, when the president travels, he's got a 30 nautical mile ring, and that doesn't so much bother the average pilot. The 10 nautical mile ring bothers every pilot because you just aren't flying. But in that extra 20 miles, as long as we're not doing flight instruction and practice approaches, stuff like that, we can actually fly in that airspace. We just have to file a flight plan and get the proper authorization. So we got to read the context of the TFR, and you can really only do that if you go on Duats or Duat and actually take a look at what the text of the TFR reads. It'll also give you one important thing: the phone number of someone to contact regarding that TFR. So if we have any questions or we want to find out how we're going to fly through that TFR, we call the guy on the TFR at that number and ask them, hey, I need to go from point A to point B. Your TFR is magically in my way. How can I get through this TFR? What do I have to do? We do that. Bada boom, bada bing. He'll either tell us, hey, you just can't get through it, or here's what you got to do. You need to do A, B, C, and D. We do A, B, C, and D, and now we go through the TFR.
So here's the TFR for Titusville. It goes year, month, day, time. So 13-0. That's kind of a weird format.
So what it says is, pursuant to 14 CFR section 91-145, if you look at the regulation, that provides the guidance. Management of aircraft operations in the vicinity of aerial demonstrations and major sporting events. Aerial operations are prohibited within a 5 nautical mile ring, and it gives you lats and longs, or the Melbourne VOR DME 348-degree radial at 26.4 miles at and below 15,000 feet MSL. Unless authorized by ATC. Bob Boswell, phone number 321-432-2011.
Bob, I need to get through your TFR, bro. What's up?
Yeah. And apparently Titusville Air Traffic Control Tower with a phone number is the coordination facility. So if we need to coordinate going through that area, we can talk to Bob, find out how we can do it, and then talk to the tower and say, hey, how can we coordinate this to happen?
That sounds cool.
So, you know, we might actually use that phone number if we wanted to fly in such a event. My buddy owns two T-34s, and he does this stuff.
So this weekend, man.